Hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Davis, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Anthropology Department at Penn State. And what I'll be discussing with you today is some of the work that I have been doing looking at grassy ecosystems and the interactions that these ecosystems have with people. And specifically, the work that I've been conducting looks at this through the lens of paleoecology, archaeology, and remote sensing, or geophysical evidence. And so paleoenvironmental evidence demonstrates that grasslands have existed on Madagascar for potentially millions of years, since the Miocene. Archaeological evidence, however, demonstrates that the mosaic of grasslands and forests that exists and have existed for quite an extensive period of time were suddenly changed around 1100 years ago. And this disturbance really coincides with increased human presence and activity on the island. Around 800 to 1000 BP, we have evidence from the archaeological record of Sweden agriculture taking place and a transition from forests to grassland ecosystems in certain parts of the island, especially in the central highlands. And this transformation continues in the present. What we also know is that around 1,000 years ago, once again around this 1000 BP threshold, there's evidence, extensive evidence of zebu and other cattle and grazing species from archaeological contexts, which indicates that herding and pastoralism have likely persisted on the island for at least 1,000 years. Within the last 500 years, zebu and cattle have become some of the most significant animals as they were used for a variety of purposes, including subsistence, labor, and cultural traditions and ceremonies. Additional work from archaeology and ethnography further documents the use of pastures for a variety of animal species, as well as extensive human migratory events, movement and migration from the north and the central highlands down into the south and back again for the purpose of acquiring cattle for rice production in the highlands, as well as ceremonial purposes for which cattle play a central role. Remote sensing datasets can be quite useful for documenting and understanding grassland ecosystem diversity and changes over time. So satellites afford us the ability to view grasslands and ecological landscape classifications in both spectrum of visible light that we can see, red, green, and blue, as well as things beyond human sight capabilities, such as the near-infrared spectrum. And the near-infrared especially is useful for identifying different taxa and quantifying available nutrients and water sources from the environment. Classification of grassy biomes can take place in two ways. So we can do this via unsupervised methods, wherein a computer will take an image, it will look at the differences in the spectral values, and it will basically pull out a classification where it groups pixels that are similar to each other as the same class. And this can be very useful in identifying very subtle changes and patches of different grasslands and plant species, especially when we don't have that much information about what is actually in the environment. When we do have more information, though, we can use what's called a supervised method, where we can tell the computer, here are examples of, species A, B, and C, and it will then classify that for you, where you can get these very nice land cover classifications that show you what types of species and plants and animals are in different places. Remote sensing can also give us a good sense of change over time. So this shows you a time lapse of what the environment looks like in the south of Madagascar over the span of, every month over the span of several years. We can also do this with indicators of how healthy vegetation is. And you'll see that, over the course of the year, the dry season gets much fainter, the wet season gets much greener. Furthermore, we can also do things like understanding fire ecologies and also human disturbance within the context of large landscapes, which can then feed back into our understanding of how human activity coincides with grassy biome ecosystems and their change over time. So for the purposes of this workshop, the data generated by our team focuses on the documentation of cultural events and grassland environments. Especially those that coincide with human subsistence strategies, that use grassy biome environments, like pastoralism. So our research also engages with paleoecology, which can tell us about how these systems have shifted over longer periods of time, and remote sensing, which is integral to much of our work, provides a means to track these changes in landscape composition and landscape modification through more recent history, maybe the past 50 or 60 years or so, and then classify biodiversity across these landscapes. These data sets allow us to investigate important questions, including how human pastoral activity has transformed local ecologies, in particular the makeup and distribution of grasslands and grass species, and the combination of archaeological, paleoecological, and geophysical data can help aid our understanding of the effects that different kinds of human action have on grassland management, and ultimately to improve our understanding of grassy biome distributions, especially those from the Holocene and earlier periods. We need to improve our landscape coverage through highly refined paleoclimate datasets and archaeological datasets, which in turn will help disentangle human activities and their effects on grassland changes over long periods of time. And with that, I will just acknowledge the fact that a lot of the work that has been done here has been funded by the NSF and SPARC, which is an NSF-funded project. And with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those.